Hello boys and girls, welcome back to the next part of the BFG. I hope you're all settled and ready because here we go. A troggle humper for flesh lump eater. They's always having 50 winks before they go scrumpering off to hunt human beings in the evening, the BFG said. He stopped for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Joints is only sleeping every then and now, he said. Not nearly as much as human beings. Human beings is crazy for sleeping. Is it ever so occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years fast asleep? I must admit that never occurred to me, Sophie said. Well, you should allow it to occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. This human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years and is not even knowing where he is. Not even doing anything, not even thinking. That's a funny thought, Sophie said. Exactly, said the BFG. So what I is trying to explain to you is that a human being who says he is 50 is not 50. He's really only 30. Oh, what about me, Sophie said. I'm 8. Well, you's not 8 at all, the BFG said. Human bean babies and little chidlers is spending half their time asleep, so you is only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. Well, you may think you're 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You was only 4, and please stop higgling me. Titchy little snapper whippers like you should not be higgling around with an old sage and onion who is hundreds of years older than you. Well, how much do giants sleep? Sophie asked. Well, there's never wasting much time snozzling, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. But when do you sleep? Sophie asked. Well, even less than that, the BFG answered. I sleeping only once in a blue baboon. Sophie, peeping out from her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now than when they were awake. Sprawled out across the yellow plain, they covered an area about the size of a football field. Most of them were lying on their backs, with their enormous mouths wide open, and they were snoring like foghorns. The noise was awful. Suddenly, the BFG gave a jump in the air. By gumfrog, he cried, I is just having the most wopsy whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. You just wait to see what I is going to bring out. He galloped off fast to his cave with Sophie hanging on tight to the rim of the pocket. He rolled back the stone. He entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Huggabee, he said. We is doing this lovely bit of buck swashling both together. He laid aside the dream-catching net, but hung on to the suitcase. He ran across to the other side of the cave and grabbed the long trumpet thing, the one he had been carrying when Sophie had first seen him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Peep your head up good, the BFG said. Then you will get a fine winkle of what's going on. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giants, he slowed his pace. He began moving softly. He crept on his toes towards the ugly brutes. They were still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive, filthy, diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the gizzard gulper, the blood bottler, the meat dripper, the child chewer. Then he stopped. He had reached the flesh lump eater. He pointed at him. Then he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. He knelt on the ground and very quietly he opened the suitcase. He took out of it the glass jar that contained the terrible, nightmarish troggle humper. At that point, Sophie guessed what was going to happen next. Ouch, she thought. This could be rather dangerous. She crouched lower in the pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck out of sight very fast should anything go wrong. They were about 10 feet away from the flesh lump eater's face. The snoring, snorting noise he was making was disgusting. Every now and again, a big bubble of spit formed between his two open lips, and then it would burst with a splash and cover his face with spit. Ugh. Taking infinite care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet Trogglehumper into the wide end of his long trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the flesh lump eater's face. He took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and then he blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red go darting towards the giant's face. For a split second it hovered above the face, then it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up the giant's nose. But it had all happened so quickly, Sophie couldn't be sure. "We'd better be skidding away quick to where it's safe," the BFG whispered. He trotted off for about 100 yards, then he stopped. He crouched low to the earth. "Now," he said, "we is waiting for the gun and flames to begin." They didn't have to wait long. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearful roar Sophie had ever heard, and she saw the flesh lump eater's body, all 54 feet of it, rise up off the ground and fall back again with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce about in the most violent fashion. It was quite frightening to watch. Roared the flesh lump eater. "He's still asleep," the BFG whispered. "The terrible Trogglehump nightmare's beginning to set in." "Serves him right," Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for this great brute who ate children as though they were sugar lumps. "Save us!" screamed the flesh lump eater, thrashing about madly. "He's after me! He's getting me!" The thrashing of limbs and the waving of arms became more violent by the second. It was an awesome thing to watch such a massive creature having such mighty convulsions. "It's Jack!" bellowed the flesh lump eater. "It's the Groofle Grunchus Jack! Jack is after me! Jack is whack crackling me! Jack is spike sticking me! Jack is splash splunking me! Oh, it is the terrible fright swiping Jack!" The flesh lump eater was writhing about over the ground like some colossal tortured snake. "Oh, spare me, Jack!" he yelled. "Don't hurt me, Jack!" "Who is this Jack he's on about?" Sophie whispered. "Oh, well, Jack is the only human being all giants is frightened of," the BFG told her. "They's all absolutely terrified of Jack. They's all hearing that Jack is a famous giant killer." "Save me!" screamed the flesh lump eater. "Have mercy on this poor little giant! The beanstalk! Oh no! He's coming at me with a terrible spike-sticking beanstalk! Take it away! I's begging you, Jack! I's praying you not to touch me with your terrible spike-sticking beanstalk!" "Us giants," the BFG whispered, "is not knowing very much about the dreaded human being called Jack. We's only knowing that he is a famous giant killer, and that he is owning something called a beanstalk. We's knowing that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing that Jack is using to kill giants." Sophie couldn't help smiling. "What you griggling at?" the BFG asked her, slightly nettled. "I'll tell you later," Sophie said. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was tying his whole body in knots. "Don't do it, Jack!" he screeched. "I was not eating you. I's never eating human beings. I swear I's never gobbled a single human being in me wholesome life." "Liar," said the BFG. Just then, one of Flesh Lump Eater's flailing fists caught the still fast asleep meat-dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his furiously thrashing legs kicked the snoring gizzard-gulping giant right in the guts. Both the injured giants woke up and leaped into their feet. "He's swiping me right in the mouth," yelled the meat dripper. "He's bung-swoggling me smack in the guts," shouted the gizzard gulper. The two of them rushed at the flesh lump eater and began pounding him with their fists and feet. The wretched flesh lump eater woke up with a bang. He awoke straight from one nightmare into another. He roared into battle, and in the bellowing, thumping rough and tumble that followed, One sleeping giant after another either got stepped on or kicked. Soon, all 9 of them were on their feet having the most almighty free-for-all. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses went crunch, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of the battle rolled across the yellow plain. The BFG smiled a big wide smile of absolute pleasure. "Oh, I is loving it when they is all having a good tough and rumble," he said. "They'll kill each other," Sophie said. "Never," said the BFG. "Those beasts is always bishing and walloping at one another. Soon it will be getting dusky and they'll be galloping off to fill their tummies." "They're coarse and foul and filthy," Sophie said. "I hate them." As the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, "We certainly was putting that nightmare to good use, wasn't we?" "Excellent use," Sophie said. "Well done, you." Next chapter, Dreams. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the table nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream that they had caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" Sophie asked him. "Well, every dream is having its special label on the bottle," the BFG said. "How else could I be finding them when I is wanting one in a hurry?" "But can you really and truly tell what sort of dream it is going to be by simply listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," the BFG said, not looking up. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "Well, you was less or more right," the BFG said. "Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum noise, and these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music, do you mean tunes?" "I is not meaning tunes." "Then what do you mean?" "Well, human beings is having their own music, right or left?" "Right," Sophie said. "Lots of music." "And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They's getting shivers down their spindles, right or left?" "Right," Sophie said. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what that message is, but they is loving it just the same." "Well, that is about right," Sophie said. "But because of these jump squiffling ears of mine, I is not only able to hear the music the dreams is making, but is understanding it also." "What do you mean understanding it?" Sophie said. "Well, I can read it," the BFG said. "It talks to me. It's like a language." "I find that just a little hard to believe," Sophie said. "I'll bet you also find it hard to believe in clogswinkles," the BFG said, "and how they is visiting us from the stars." "Well, of course I don't believe that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me," he said, "if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not really. They is nearly all of them not muchers and squeak pips." "I beg your pardon," Sophie said. "The matter with human beings," the BFG went on, "is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they's actually seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course cogswinkles is existing. I's meeting them oftenly. I's even chittering to them." He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so far. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not very well formed. Here is what they said. "This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death." "The kiss of what?" Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. "I is telling you once before," he said quietly, "that I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. That is not my fault. I does my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself." I'm sorry, Sophie said. I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer. Then he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. Tell me honestly, Sophie said, if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge? More, the BFG said. A lot more. But I can't be scribbling the whole got-flunking dream on a titchy bit of paper. Of course there's more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding his great head solemnly up and down. This dream is continuing very nicely. It has a very dory hunky ending. How does it end? So he said, please tell me. You would be dreaming that the morning after you was saving the teacher from the river, you was arriving at school and you was seeing all the 500 people sitting in the assembly hall and all the teachers as well. And the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I is wanting the whole school to give the 3 cheers for Sophie because she's so brave and is saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done. And forever after that, even when you was getting your sums all gung-swizzled and muddled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you was waking up. Oh, I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It's a fizz wizard. He lit the back of the label and stuck it onto the jar. I was usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, he said, but you was watching me and making me jumpsy. Well, I'll go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Oh, don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you will be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of colour in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small oblong sea green jellyish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful, but pulsing gently, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. Well, what will you feed it on? Sophie asked. Oh, he's not needing to feed it any food, the BFG told her. Well, that's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants. Well, the north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody's feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting patiently forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it's a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here is some of the really good dreams, he said, the fizz wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. Well, my labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right from the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar, and this is what it said. Today I is sitting in class and I discover that if I is staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end her head drops onto the desk and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumridge. How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave this school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy I was putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumridge. And then I was hearing my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up, your breakfast is ready." "What a funny dream," Sophie said. "Oh, it's a ring beller," the BFG said. "It's a whopsy." Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsating gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a trifle larger. "Do you have separate dreams for boys and separate dreams for girls?" Sophie asked. "Of course," the BFG said. "If I's given a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was a really whopsy girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking, what a rot bungling grink sludging old dream that was." "Boys would," Sophie said. "These here are all girls' dreams on this shelf," the BFG said. "Can I read a boy's dream?" "You can," the BFG said, and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows: "I was making myself a marvellous pair of suction boots, and when I was putting them on, I was able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I was walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she is starting to yell at me, as she always does, yelling, 'What on earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling?' And I looks down at her and I smiles and says, 'I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it.'" "I find that one really rather silly," Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another ring beller. Perhaps you has seen enough now." "Oh, let me read another boy's one," Sophie said. The next label said, "The telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephony voice, 'Simpkins speaking.' Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, 'What? Who?' And then he says, 'Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it's me you is wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son.' My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat, and then at last he is saying, 'Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir.' And he turns to me and he is saying in a rather respectful voice, 'Is you knowing the President of the United States?' And I says, 'No, but I expect he's hearing about me.' Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, 'Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way.' And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, 'Get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school.'" "Boys are crazy," Sophie said. "Let me read this next one." Sophie started reading the next label. "I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I's become absolutely invisible all over. I's still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, 'Where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly.' So I says, 'Here I is.' And she says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And she says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And she yells, 'Henry, come up quick!' And when my daddy rushes in, I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating in the air, but of course he is not seeing me, and he shouts, 'Where are you, boy?' And I says, 'Here.' And he says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And he says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And he says, 'The soap, boy, the soap is flying in the air.' Then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement and says, 'You is the invisible boy.' And I says, now I is going to have some fun. So when I is out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in there, there is a panic, with everybody yelling, "A ghost! A ghost!" And people is screaming left and right, and big strong policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I seen Mr. Grummett, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightening howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I's walking up and feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. "Pretty ridiculous," Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button just to see if it worked. Nothing happened. "Dreams is very mystical things," the BFG said. "Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough?" "Oh, just this last one," Sophie said. "This one here." She started reading. "I has written a book, and it is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you is hooked on it. You cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it whilst they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it when they is operating airplanes. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I is waking up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer in the world that the world has ever known, until my mummy comes in and says, 'I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really, your spelling is atrocious. So is your punctuation.'" "That's enough for now," the BFG said. "There's dillions more, but my arms is getting tired of holding you up." "What are all those over there?" Sophie said. "Why have they got such tiny labels?" "That," the BFG said, "is because one day I's catching so many dreams I's not having the time or energy to write out long labels. But there is enough to remind me." "Oh, can I look?" Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars where she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. "I's climbing up Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I's inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I's able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I's only an 8-year-old boy, but I's grown a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys is jealous. I's able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies." "What amazes me," Sophie said, "is how you ever learned to write in the first place." "Ah," the BFG said. "I's been wondering how long it is before you was asking me that." "Well, considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvellous," Sophie said. "How did you learn?" The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in the huge hands of the BFG. "One night," he said, "I was blowing a dream through a window, and I sees this book lying on the little boy's bedroom table. I wanted to see it so very badly, you understand, but I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that." "So how did you get it?" Sophie asked. "Well, I borrowed it," the BFG said, smiling a little. "Just for a short time, I borrowed it." "Well, how long have you had it?" Sophie asked. "Oh, perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. "Soon I shall be putting it back." "And that's how you taught yourself to write?" Sophie asked him. "Well, I was reading it hundreds of times," the BFG said, "and I was still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious story." Sophie took the book out of his hand. "Nicholas Nickleby," she read aloud. "By Dahl's Chickens," the BFG said. "By who?" Sophie said. Just then there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. "What's that?" Sophie cried. "Oh, that is all the giants zip-fizzing off to other countries to guzzle human beings," the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. "Where's you off to tonight?" shouted the BFG. "We's all of us flashbunking off to England tonight," answered the Fleshland Peter as they went galloping past. "England is a luxurious land, and we's fancying a few nice little English chidlers." "Aye," shouted the maid masher, "he's known where there is a giggle house for girls, and I's guzzling myself as a froth blower." "And I's knows where there's a boggle box for boys," shouted the gizzard gulper. "All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra lick swishy." In a few seconds the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. "What did he mean?" Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. "What's a giggle house for girls?" "Oh, he means a girls' school," the BFG said. "He will be eating them by the bundle." "Oh no!" cried Sophie. "And boys from a boys' school," said the BFG. "It mustn't happen," Sophie cried out. "We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing." "Well, there's not a thing we can do," the BFG said. "We as helpless as horse feathers." He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. "It is now quite safe for you to be outside until they's coming back," he said. The sun had just dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. There we go, boys and girls. I hope you've enjoyed that again. Settle yourselves down now, ready for sleep, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.